In this video I'm going to talk about some philosophical concept that I've been kind of intrigued by for a little while, which is compatibilism. It's the idea that free will and determinism are, well, compatible. I know that's a weird thing to think about, but I hope that the perspective I'm about to present will make enough sense to spark off some discussion. First, I'd like to present a distinction between formal and practical determinism, and then I'll try to do the same for free will and present an argument for practical compatibilism. So, formal determinism is, in a way, the belief that every point in space and time has a fundamentally determined state. However, if we have no way to predict what every single atom is going to be in a specific point in space and time, then there is no reason to believe or to reject that, the deterministic hypothesis. In other words, we call it undecided. So what we will need is a function that takes into account space and time, maybe other things as well, and we must be certain that it predicts or describes to infinite precision this specific state of space and time. There are two ways of assuring ourselves for that. First off, we could accurately measure the state of everywhere in space and time in the universe, which is obviously impossible, especially due to all of the shenanigans with observations, being, etc. But it's also just practically, impossible. The other way would be to have a formal proof that this construction accurately describes the state of everywhere and everywhen. It doesn't have to be computable, to be honest, so we don't have to have a predictive value or something, but it does require such a proof. And technically, yes, there could be such a construct existing. I'm willing to believe it. However, a formal proof that it accurately describes all bits of space and time is much more complicated. Actually, it's related to the halting problem, which asks if we can verify whether or not any given algorithm will ever stop once compiled and run. This, unfortunately, is an undecidable problem. Yet we know just enough to say that any given algorithm has a likelihood of approximately less than 6.27% to halt. So it's called a Chaitin omega constant, for those who want to know. It's highly match independent, but that's the highest value that I've ever seen any Chaitin omega take. So that's what I'm using here. And the thing is, Turing kind of proved that literally any mathematical statement, any mathematical proof, is no more no less an algorithm, and that the decidability of a statement is exactly the same question as the halting problem. So because of this, I believe in formal determinism to 6.27%. I mean, I want to say even less, but I have no reason to. Although the paper, which, that presents it to be around 6.27%, presents a Turing machine that, quite honestly, seems much less complex than, the real world. So I'm willing to bet I'd have to believe it in even less, but we can't really know for sure after all. Practical determinism, on the other hand, is, at least in my opinion, much more defensible. It's the idea that although we can't 100% determine everything about the world, there are things that we can predict to some extent, bounded both in space and time. A bit like weather or social behaviors or simply double pendulum. The latter is a very good analogy as well. We can modelize the double pendulum. We can add as many variables as we want, like friction, etc. But we have to add in the error terms for all these. which bounds the experiment to specific space and time ranges for given error bounds. And this, well, I believe in it, actually. I believe that we can modelize things and accurately predict things up to specific error bounds. Yet I barely believe that we could do that with infinite precision and no band whatsoever, or just even a constant error bound. That's still formal determinism, and I still not believe it any more than 6.27%. And fighting a computable such descriptor of the universe, basically, the odds will drop to square of that, so 0.39% to be precise. As long as it's bound to specific space and time ranges, I'm pretty much okay with that. However, these models have to be explicitly constructed, and whether it's computable and somewhat accurate to some extent, or uncomputable but well reasoned, I'll be fine with either types of models. Usually, when I hear people arguing for determinism, their arguments only point to this practical form instead of the formal one. Yet their description of determinism often confuses both sides, which are very much distinct. Formal free will is the ability to choose between different possible courses of action completely and integrally unimpeded. It's basically what I took from Wikipedia, but slightly rearranged. So, in other words, our choices are as unique as it gets. Practical determinism only aspires to reach a certain level of accuracy. Accuracy being the central notion of formal determinism. And in a sense, the central notion of formal free will is uniqueness. Well, if you're conscious and stuff like that, but that's a whole other deal. At least there is no measurable distinction, between being able to decide certain things in a less influenced, copied manner, and being able to make unique decisions regardless of whether it was a conscious decision or not, or a product of someone's brain in a vat who's imagining of a situation. So, in short, I'd say that the uniqueness is the fundamental social notion of free will overall. Maybe not formal free will, but in practical terms, yeah, pretty much it seems. As a consequence, what I would define as practical free will is the ability for someone to accumulate very unique perspectives. It's obviously very contextual. For example, Newton and Leibniz used calculus in a time where it was basically not even a thing, yet which made their mathematical analysis very unique for the time. Nowadays, calculus is just regular high school math. But still, Newton and Leibniz, for practically inventing or at least formalizing calculus in such a way, did a very much unique thing. So you could argue that they were acting in practical free will, so to speak, at least in this instance. So for an individual to acquire more practical free will means to be able to make more and more unique decisions. And I'm a constructivist. As I said in this very, very long video, I'm an epistemological constructivist, I'm a social constructivist, etc. I think that pretty much all of our knowledge wouldn't exist without social interaction, all over culture, etc. And in a purely constructivist fashion, I will say that a very diverse essential environment will be a major step towards individual free will for everyone within it. And giving more weight to people with radically differing backgrounds, perspectives is just as important. Sure, there will always be normativities, for the better or worse, I don't care. All I care about is that the most unnecessary ones ought to be overcome. That's what I'm saying. But anyway, to come back to the subject of the video, I'd say that all the formal determinism and formal free will are pretty much incompatible. At least I have no reason or care to think otherwise. I still don't believe in either of them. However, practical determinism makes sense, and so does practical free will. I like both of them. I cherish both of them as important and interesting concepts, both philosophically and politically, which is why I consider myself a practical compatibilist. I think that formal determinism is virtually undecidable, and I completely reject formal free will. And yet, I believe in practical notions of determinism and free will at the same time. I hope you can see why I think it's erroneous to confuse these formal and practical concepts, and not merely as two sides of the same coin, but widely different subjects of their own. I've been pretty much inspired by the distinction made between formal and practical Bayesianism here. For those who speak French, I kind of got that from this video. Surely some people will say that my notion of practical free will has nothing to do with actual free will, or like formal free will, as I say. To which I will respond that I can tell them exactly the same with determinism, with the added nuance that at least I do make the distinction between these two forms. This is clearly not the case for a lot of people who defend determinism, at least in online discussion. Okay, I know it could sound like an attack, but that wasn't really the point. Instead, I just wanted to question these widespread interpretation of determinism and free will, and sorry, and we can be for both under certain circumstances and against in other ones. Obviously, I'm more of a practicalist myself, so that's why you could hear me call myself a compatibilist in future debates, maybe, instead of the longer phrase practical compatibilist. Yet, I wanted to make that distinction real clear so that we are all on the same page. If you want to hear more about compatibilism, sorry, there's this video that explains some forms of it, and to be fair, there are really interesting, somewhat different point of views, especially, well, spoiler alert, Patricia Chaitin's, which I think are worth investigating. Especially, I like to say that the notion of free will I presented, centered around uniqueness, doesn't really take into account the amount of control or consciousness one may have over their own unique actions and decisions. So maybe, in fact, I should take into account this measure of control, which can only be done if we can figure out things that could impair one's ability to control what they're doing. But I'd argue this difference only matters in the most extreme cases. And Patricia Chaitin seems to actually make a distinction between free will and control somewhat. I didn't get everything, sorry. Or maybe formal free will and a practical form of free will, which includes control. I don't know. I'll admit I've been assuming that I can't know for sure whether someone is conscious or not, in order to center my version of it around uniqueness rather than control. But if you believe in consciousness, in some form or another, then I guess Patricia's viewpoint could really interest you. But for me, control is a complex subject. I acknowledge that there are things which tend to impede one's ability to reason freely, but I think these are actually, usually extreme cases, and that usually the uniqueness criterion is pretty much all that matters. I could obviously change my mind in the near future, If I do, I'll probably make another mini video, but for now, I'm pretty okay with that. So, yeah. Anyway, that's all I had to say on the matter. I didn't talk much about politics in this video, but even though I did implicitly talk about my liking for multiculturalism, but I guess that's for the better. Don't hesitate to leave your opinion in the comment section down below. That's always really insightful. My cat is playing, sorry. I'd like to thank Dunbury for introducing me to the concept of compatibilism. All my sources, obviously, as well, and everyone who watched this rumble, pretty much, from A to Z. Have a good praxis, comrades. See ya.